Feminist Funk. Today, our fed up feminists discuss
Disenchanted
with Disenchantment. Hi everybody, I'm Mel.
And I'm Ash.
Welcome to Feminist Funk. Today we're going to be talking about Disenchantment Season 1.
We will go over all the things we hated and the few things we liked.
You can expect to hear about Elfo, Bean, the problem with pacing, the problem with the jokes, and then we're also going to mention specific episodes. In case you're not familiar with the show, Disenchantment is a Netflix original, an animated series. It was created by Matt Groening, the same person who created The Simpsons and Futurama. It takes place in a sort of fantasy medieval kind of place.
Yeah. It's twisted medieval fantasy, one could say.
Yeah, exactly. It is disenchanted with the whole fantasy narrative, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
And I wanted to start this podcast by saying that I'm a huge fan of Matt Groening, as well as Josh Weinstein and Bill Oakley, all of who worked on The Simpsons. Josh Weinstein and Bill Oakley are actually responsible for some of my all-time favorite Simpsons seasons. And they also developed Mission Hill, one of my all-time favorite animated series, which we will be doing a podcast about soon. Of course, I'm also a huge fan of Futurama, which was also created by Matt Groening, as I mentioned. And speaking of Futurama, they actually got a bunch of voice actors to take part in Disenchantment, including Billy West. You probably know him as the voice of Fry, Zoidberg, Professor Farnsworth, and more. John DiMaggio, who's the voice of Bender. Tress MacNeille, who's the voice of Mom, and a bunch of other people. So my question, going into this podcast, is what the fuck happened? This had all the ingredients to make an amazing show. Super talented writers, amazing voice actors. It was a Netflix original, which usually allows them more freedom to do all sorts of creative stuff. Usually Netflix originals are better because that's how they convince people to actually buy Netflix. So hopefully through our discussion we'll be able to figure out what went wrong.
Yes. I also found out the lady who voiced Bean, she's a comedian, but she was also like one of the main creative minds / actors from Broad City, which is really, really popular. So I wonder if some of the humor from that bled into this, because she did ad-lib, so. But mostly for Bean. Yeah, mostly.
You know, that would explain why Bean's lines are so much funnier than the rest of the show, because a lot of the zany comments, the feminist ones, like when Bean is like, before I enter a semi-permanent stage of pregnancy, woo! Fucking love that.
Yeah.
So Bean has a lot of the feminist jokes, actually.
So who knows, they may come from her. That wouldn't surprise me terribly.
So there were some good jokes, but the vast majority of the jokes were so not funny. And not even just so bad that they're good, just plain not good. It was so sad.
There was so much potential.
Josh Weinstein, Bill Oakley, why have you forsaken me?
I mean, the obvious one is just the over-explanation of things. Like, you've mentioned it before, the whole zombie Simpsons thing, if you want to explain it for the audience.
Well, zombie Simpsons is more of a problem with Homer's character and less of the humor, as far as I know. I'm not a super diehard fan of The Simpsons, unfortunately, but for me, I think the problem with Zombie Simpsons is really the changes to the characters, which impacts a lot of that.
Okay.
But the show does kind of remind me of the Zombie Simpsons. It reminds me a lot of the newer Simpsons, actually, which is not a good thing.
Yeah. The over-explanation of jokes being the big...
Yeah, and the jokes are just not funny. Like, I guess you're relying on incongruity theory, but it's not amusing. And then sometimes I'm even like, is this a joke? I guess technically you could analyze it as a joke, but it's so not funny. What the heck is going on? So just to give you an example, the first time that Alpho sees the castle, he goes, wow. So you're assuming that he's going to say, oh my God, it's so beautiful, right? But then he says, that castle is so small. So I guess that could technically be funny from superiority theory. You could be laughing at how dumb he is, but superiority is my least favorite style of humor because it's really just not funny a lot of the time. So it could also be incongruity theory because you're not expecting him to say that, but even then the joke would not be funny. However, another problem with it is then he goes on to say, oh wait, I'm just far away. Stop explaining the jokes. That is the worst thing you could do. If you are telling a joke, for the love of God, don't explain it. It kills it.
Yeah. That was actually, the incongruity theory is like a very good thing to point out because I feel like they assumed people wouldn't see the jokes coming for a lot of really obvious ones, like the whole Zog and the steam coming out of his ears thing, where he put it in and he's like, oh, wait for it. And I'm like, okay, yeah, it's obviously going to be delayed. And so it didn't end up being funny because you just like, you knew that's what was going to happen. Mm-hmm. So the whole point of incongruity theory is you're not expecting it, right? Exactly. It's supposed to be random almost. And you're just like, oh, yeah, you know, that's funny because it's random. And it feels like they try to do that constantly and it just never worked because you could just see the joke coming a mile away. So I don't know if it was because they expected a different audience, maybe? Like,
it honestly feels like it might have been targeted towards 13-year-olds or something. I feel like it's that kind of humor, you know what I mean? Where it's like really basic and you're still kind of, I don't know. It seems like something I would have found funny maybe at that age.
It's people who aren't as familiar with, I think.
Exactly. It's not a challenging kind of humor. It's not subtle like the Arrested Development seasons were so funny because the humor was so subtle. That is my favorite kind of humor. But actually, if we want to compare it to something maybe more fitting, it might be more fitting to compare it to the classic Simpsons. So the thing about the classic Simpsons, a lot of the dumb humor comes from Homer and other characters, but the thing is, they're very likable characters. You care about all of them. I don't give a shit about any of these characters, except for maybe Zog, and that's only because of episode 9 and 10. And we'll talk some more about that a little bit later. But none of the characters are likable, so I don't give a shit about what they say. What makes Homer funny is that, yeah, he's dumb, but you also know he's like the sweetest guy, and he loves his family so much. And again, the jokes are unexpected. And the thing about The Simpsons, the classic Simpsons, is it's also joke after joke after joke. Like sometimes in a 15-second interval, you can get as many as 5 jokes rolled into one. That is funny. Of course, like there was a ton of effort that went into The Simpsons. Yeah. This show, honestly, not to be mean, but sounds like really low effort. And I literally mean sounds like low effort because when they're in the town and stuff, you don't hear any background noises, anything like that. It just seems very lazy and cheap.
Which is weird for a show on Netflix, like an animated show on Netflix. Given, I mean, to be fair, you have something like BoJack, which is fairly high quality and probably has a lot of money riding on it, especially now. But Netflix clearly has the money to invest in that. Matt Groening and Bill Oakley, and who was the third?
Josh Weinstein.
And Josh Weinstein. Like, all 3 of them are clearly very well known. They're going to have a lot of pull, because clearly they have people who have followed them from The Simpsons to Futurama to whatever. So it's just a weird thing to, like, they clearly had the money in this case. So it's weird to think that they didn't put in that extra effort. It doesn't make a ton of sense. But the show itself has a lot of the building blocks. Like, you can sort of, besides the art style, of course, you can see the influence of The Simpsons. You can sort of see where the whole Futurama elements come in. But then there's just a misfire in a weird, I don't know. It's just like, it's the weirdest way. It just doesn't, like, you're right about the characters not feeling very likable. I think the problem is that constantly throughout the show, A, tries to make us laugh at them, but all you feel is bad for them. You think of Bean and the fact that her father wants her to get married and all of that, and you feel bad that she's stuck in that situation. But then she also goes on to do really terrible things, so it's like, okay, well,
That's why I don't feel bad for her. I would feel bad for her if she was trying. I don't, because she goes out and she drinks and she's like just a teenager, and yeah, okay, I get you're trying to escape your life or whatever, but that to me makes her really not likable, and she's not a good person. And I would argue she wasn't a good person even before Lucy.
Yeah. It's hard because you don't see her much before Lucy. I think you have, all of 5 some odd minutes before Lucy shows up and starts influencing her to do things, like run away from her wedding, which she probably would have done anyway, like, let's be real. Lucy didn't really have to convince her. She already wasn't into the wedding. But for everybody else, Alpha, you feel bad for him because he just wants to be depressed and he's like forced to be in this very conformist, happy-go-lucky sort of society. Lucy's a demon, you're not supposed to feel bad for them. I don't know if they ever establish a gender for Lucy. Do demons have
Too
gender?
complicated.
As you said, Zog, he's not a great guy. He's not a great king.
I like Zog, but I think that has to do more with John DiMaggio than anything. And okay, so I've watched the show 4 times. It's bad. I actually enjoy bad TV. It relaxes me. So the first 3 times that I watched it, I did not like him. I did not find any of the jokes funny, but the one time that I did laugh, the 4th time around, for some stupid reason, was the super obvious jokes when he's looking at stuff like from every angle except the one that you know is going to freak him out, and it's so stupid and you can see it a mile away, but for some reason Joe DiMaggio's delivery the 4th time I watched it made me laugh. It's like, okay, it's very weird.
Wait, which joke was this? What episode?
You know, like with the cake, when he's like, look, the top is nice, the back looks good, like, you know, but I think that's more from John DiMaggio. Joe DiMaggio. Joe DiMaggio. But I wanted to go back to the humor for one last second. I thought of a good comparison. I can't take credit for it. It comes from a different website. I don't remember the name of it, but I'll try to put the link to it on the video for YouTube. It's basically somebody explaining the style of humor from classic Simpsons to modern Simpsons, and they give the example of this joke that they made up. Imagine Homer at the airport. He's waiting at some seats. On the speakers you hear, "Fat people can now board the plane." And he goes, "Woohoo!" And he goes and he boards the plane. That is like a modern Simpsons kind of joke, right?
Oh.
Very obvious, not funny. A classic Simpsons interpretation of that joke would have had Homer still sit there for a few seconds, you know, building the suspense. And then somebody would walk over to him and say, "Sir," and like point him to go to the line to get on the plane with the other fat characters in the universe. And he would just look down and go, "Oh."
That's it. Like, the timing of that is hilarious, right?
Exactly. See, that's funny. So, yeah, that's what's wrong in terms of the humor.
Yeah.
Just very obvious jokes, and the timing is off.
Yeah, the delivery for some of them, except for maybe John DiMaggio's character, and Beans in certain instances, were just, all of them just were slightly offbeat. Or too soon, you're right. Yeah.
And just not funny. Just plain, I don't, like, even if he would have done it a little later, not funny. Although that would explain why I laughed the 4th time that I saw the cake joke. Because I knew that it was coming, and I was waiting for it. And so it was building that suspense because I think I remembered it coming sooner. I wonder if the joke would have been funnier if they would have stretched it out some more, or if he would have said like, "Oh yeah, the cake is fine," and then would have gone back to it or something. I wonder if that would have been funnier. I'd have to like see it or hear it, but
Yeah.
I wonder.
I get, it's a good question. It depends. I feel like there are some jokes that deserve to be stretched out and they would have been better. Or just, no, like, the whole Elfo thing with the castle being small. If they had just cut the last line and had him walk away, it could have been funnier, and then that would have been stretched out more as a moment. Maybe he could have even made a joke when he, like, approached the castle or whatever. What were other jokes that you found humorous? I'm just thinking of the girl who but said, like, "Oh, she's talking about herself."
Oh, yeah, that was not funny.
No.
That was when Bean was going to murder the witch. And she's like, "You guys, be patient with her. She's sweating and shaking. This is her first time being killed." And then, like, this kid is like, "She's talking about herself." Hey, how is that even a joke? Was it a joke? I don't think it was a joke. I don't think you could even apply incongruity theory to that. So I don't think it was even a joke. And then this fucking idiot explains this non-joke. What are you doing? What do you think we are, like 8? Honestly, have some respect for your audience. These are probably the same people who watched Simpsons and Futurama, at least hopefully classic Simpsons. Although realistically, that generation's probably older. So, I don't know.
Being reruns.
You know, that might be a part of the problem. Actually, maybe their target audience are the same people who watch the new Futurama and the new Simpsons.
That would make sense. So, like, they're expecting people who are in their, like, mid to late teens / like early 20s as their target, which is
to preach for a moment. If you have only seen Simpsons post season 9, please do yourself a favor and watch the seasons before season 9. They are not the same at all. Please.
What did you think of the slapstick humor that we kind of see throughout the show?
The physical humor was really dumb. The thing about The Simpsons with the slapstick humor, the only ones I laugh at in the classic Simpsons is with Homer, just because the delivery is so good with the dough. It never gets old. Mm-hmm. So again, it's the delivery that makes it funny. It's not this actual slapstick. So here they had a lot of slapstick, just not funny, just very, very basic kind of humor, and also too gory.
A lot of goriness.
For no reason.
Yeah.
The thing is, okay, we get it. It's the Middle Ages. It's supposed to be gory and horrible, whatever. It really does not add anything to the show. I find, for me, that's my same opinion with like sex scenes and overt sexual kind of stuff in TV. If it doesn't add anything to the plot, then it's just gratuitous.
Yeah. No, that's pretty fair. Like I was thinking about that. So fairly early on, you see like an owl hitting the bell in town. It's meant to be the midnight bell. And it was just like, I was looking at it and I'm like, is this supposed to be funny? I didn't understand, like, it didn't even come across as humorous. And there were just so many other things, like the pigs that were eating the nobleman when the nobleman died. Yeah, and I was thinking, why did they include this? They could have cut it out. It's an explanation as to, like, what happens to the body, but did we need it? Not really. And there were just a lot of little scenes like that, which I don't know, maybe they were there to fill up, like, time, essentially. Mm-hmm. Or maybe they were supposed to, like, somebody thought they'd be funny, like the two pigs, rather, that were kissing, like... Yeah,
the parody of the...
Lady and the Tramp, yeah. Like, that little weird scene, which, like, came out of the whole pig eating. I just didn't get anything out of it, and I was thinking, who would get anything out of this? It's just not even interesting to look at. It's an overdone trope and cliche.
Yeah.
And then it's not even humorous, it's just... Okay, thanks. Like, I got to see intestines being eaten. Like, meh. What did you think of Merkrimer, actually? Because I feel like there were times where I did laugh at him, and then other times I was just like, okay.
I never laugh at his jokes, because sexist satire, even though I agree with the sentiment, often hits too close to home for me, so I often don't laugh. But I did recognize the humor in it, and I did think, oh, I do think that's funny. It hurts too much to laugh.
Yeah, that's pretty fair.
For example, when he's like, well, tell me about yourself, and Bean is on the horse and her head hits the sides, and he's like, fascinating.
Okay, that did actually make me laugh a little bit. It was awful, but...
And then she's like, oh, I'm sorry, I've been such a, I don't know, nag or something. And then he's like, it's okay, I don't listen to women.
I'm just thinking when he had sex with all the walruses, he's like, I don't need your names. My loins have to have sex with the origin. Ew. I don't know why. It was just so awful. But it made me laugh so much.
I think it's the way he said it. My loins have to have sex with the origin. It's such high diction for such a gross, like, action.
That's probably it. It just, like, it's not what you're expecting. So
yes,
it's just,
exactly.
It's just
actual
funny.
Incongruity theory. Way to go, guys.
Yeah. Oy. And then everything else with him is very predictable. Him becoming a literal pig. Okay.
Yeah, and the pacing was not only an issue for the jokes, it was also an issue for the entire show. Yeah. I think personally the show should have started on episode 8. We don't need all this fucking background about Bean. All of the other episodes, okay, with the wedding, that was setting up her character, I guess, but it wasn't an interesting episode. None of the episodes after that were really interesting. If they would have started already with the interesting part of the plot, them looking for the stupid container was kind of boring. I think it would have honestly been better if they would have found it by accident.
Yeah, that would have been more interesting.
Because, like, the whole fucking quest, you know they're going to find it because the show has to develop, right? The plot has to continue. So I think it would have been better if it would have started off with them finding it and being like, oh my god, is this what I've been searching for years? And then dive right in, bring the mom back. Yeah. That would have been way better instead of just sitting around, honestly. If I didn't like bad television, I would have stopped watching it after episode 2 or 3.
Honestly, it was just too much context. It was very clear very early on, like, okay, Bean doesn't like the life that she's in, that's fine. Her father wants to marry her off. She's just not very good at being, like, a typical princess. you just need an episode or two of setup for that. You didn't need as much as they gave. So, like, okay, her father doesn't expect much of her. He makes her an ambassador. That's fine. But then the whole Dankmeyer plot doesn't go anywhere either. It's just, there are all these different scenes that are set up for her character, and then honestly nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
It shows us a little bit about the world, I suppose. Is it meant to be her descent into villainy? Because Lucy's corrupting her? Just what is the point besides just all this setup for Bean? Yeah, you do only get into it really come episode 8.
That's really when I finally started to actually care a little bit about the characters. I still really don't give a shit about Bean. I think her mom is an interesting character.
Mm-hmm.
I like the king now. I like King Zog a lot.
Yeah.
Because of the betrayal.
Spoilers.
And knowing he used to be like this fit guy and now he had the throne, didn't even want to be king. Now he's an interesting character. Why didn't you show me that before? I would have loved him instead of being like, oh, this fucking one-dimensional character again. Just like Lucy. Just like Elfo, who's all over the fucking place. Why don't we talk about Elfo?
Okay, we can talk about Elfo. I don't know, like, when they introduced him, I felt that there was some potential interest there. Like, he's basically an assembly line worker, hates his job, hates the fact that he's supposed to be happy all the time. He wants to actually experience life. And then 2 seconds later, he kind of gets whisked off into a war, gets almost eaten. Like, whatever, that is interesting. But then they just turned him into a love interest, and that's just so boring.
Yeah, honestly, stop doing that. Oh, God. And it doesn't even, like, He just falls on top of her, sees her for all of 2 seconds, and then has a crush on her. It's so unrealistic.
There was really, like, by the end of the first episode, it's just, like, why do you like her? You don't even know her. She doesn't even know you. Like, why? What is the connection?
And I feel like they try to justify it by saying that he's into quote-unquote big girls. It's like, so what? So it's now she's just, like, a fetish for you? Like...
That's usually how that line ends up being used, right? It's just... And then any development, he just doesn't have any consistent development.
He's all over the fucking place. Sometimes he's nice. Sometimes he'll, like, stab people or kill people. Like,
yeah.
Initially, I thought he was supposed to be... You know how there's this trope of, like, oh, the little devil on your shoulder and the angel? I thought he was supposed to be the counterpart to Lucy.
Mm-hmm.
But now he's almost as bad as Lucy. He's been corrupted as well.
Pretty much. Like, the first episode sets up the dynamic, right? They're honestly quite literally, I think, at one point, like, at her shoulder being like, don't do this, do this, don't do this, don't do this. And then he just follows Bean into a descent into whatever they're supposed to be. And he turns into the nice guy trope, which is just so... Yeah. It's such a frustrating trope, and I'm so sad that it still shows up in contemporary media. It's like the nice guy who, like, pines after the girl and eventually will get her. It's just... And he does, in a weird way. Like, she kisses him, and it's like, but why? He's done nothing to deserve this.
It's true. And he's ugly.
And he's lied to her. Like, the whole girlfriend thing is at the end of the girlfriend episode, that she kisses him.
Yeah, it's episode 7.
Episode 7. He's lied to her the entire time. Doesn't want to admit his feelings. Is probably not going to be a very good partner either, to be honest. Like, he's really not shaped up to be anything, like, close to partner material. But then he also just, like, wants her so desperately and can't tell her that, like, he loves her. And, like, is clearly going to be the Ross to her Rachel. Like, eventually will get his way. And it's just, but, like, why? Why do we still like this as a trope? I don't understand.
I honestly expected a lot more from Matt Groening and Josh Weinstein, Bill Oakley, especially from Matt Groening, who's supposed to satirize stuff. Why? What happened?
Futurama doesn't have this trope. Why does this happen? I don't think it does.
That's not true. Well, Fry I think the problem with Fry is he's actually a nice guy.
Oh, okay. That's fair.
I think he really does love Leela.
Mm-hmm. Does he like her from the beginning? I can't remember. It's been so long since I've watched it.
Yeah, I think that he gets a crush on her after a little while. So he actually spends a bit of time with her before liking her, so that's good. And then he's actually a good partner to her when he gets infested with worms that make him intelligent and he actually knows how to communicate with her. But then the second that they leave and he turns into an idiot again, like, they break up because they don't have anything in common anymore.
Which will be Elfo and Bean if they get together, I guess.
Yeah, they're just not a good couple, and, like, the fucking nice guy trope.
Yeah.
It just turns women into a trophy.
Yeah. And the thing is that, like, Alpha's a baby. He's literally treated like a baby in one
Yeah,
episode.
that's so gross.
It's really, really gross. And he doesn't want to be. He's like, oh no, I'm like a big kid. But then
I'm a toddler.
Yeah. But he lets himself be babied constantly. So you know that, like, in a relationship, that would just not.
He's that
well.
kind of guy. He's the guy who's just looking for a replacement mom.
Exactly. And his mother was never around, so there you go. He has mommy issues.
Oedipus complex.
Yeah, there we go. That's why he's into big ladies.
That's right. That's true, actually.
He just wants the mommy.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, but did he have any development this season, though?
I don't think so. I really don't think so. Maybe just that he somehow got more violent. Yeah, and the thing about the nice guy trope, too, is that it adds to rape culture, because it's saying if a woman rejects you, you just have to keep persisting until she changes her mind, which sometimes women have to do because we're concerned for our own safety. It's like an evolutionary thing. That doesn't make it right. It is essentially rape. You're coercing somebody.
Exactly.
And you're raping them.
Yeah. And this whole notion of ownership as well, which is so tied into the nice guy trope, that, like, this woman belongs to you, so if you wait around long enough, she will come around, because clearly she'll realize you're the one meant for her. Because she's meant for you, right? It's just, it's so toxic and so tiring. And, like, that's what Elfo does, even in, like, the party episode with the Vikings, episode 4, 5?
Episode 4.
Episode 4. Where he acts passive-aggressive because she wants to sleep with other guys. He doesn't even approach her and say, oh, I want to dance with you, oh, I want to do anything with you. He's just annoyed at the fact that she's even interested in other men. And so, like, if that's his default state, God only knows, like, when they're actually dating and she would say no to him, like, what that would lead to. So you're right, completely. It, like, adds to that rape culture narrative, because not only do they think that they own you, they own your body, they own... You're basically right to say yes or no. They just assume that you're going to automatically say yes because you're together now.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all part of this, like, awful toxic mindset. Yeah.
And to be fair, he does try to tell her that he likes her, sort of. He says, I'm into big girls. He's like, would you date somebody like me? Which is like, come on, be upfront, and then, you know, spend walks and whatever. So
exactly, yeah.
You lost your chance. You should have been upfront. Even Lucy calls him out at one point, like, just say Bean, you want to watch the sunset with Bean. It's like, yeah, it's annoying. Honestly. I hate to agree with this fucking Lucy character because I don't like him. He's just annoying and not funny. FYI, he is not Bender. Stop trying to make him Bender, honestly.
Just very low effort, kind of, just to create him.
Honestly, the show would be, like, the same without him. I think the show would be better without him. I think the show would be better without Elfo.
Yeah. Just being on her own, doing her thing. The only thing is, it gives her friends, and that's literally it, which is, it's nice, because she didn't apparently have friends before, so that's the only positive, otherwise, The thing about Lucy is, he's clearly a plot device, who was turned into a character, who only ever does the same thing over and over and over again. And he's kind of just, there to influence her to do bad things, he's there to influence everybody around her, to create chaos. He was sent by people in Morrow, but for what reason? Like, she was already on this, like, downward spiral.
Yeah, exactly. You didn't need his help.
No. Like, she has moments of conscience, like pangs of conscience. There we go. That's the word I was looking for. Pangs of conscience. But that isn't to say she wouldn't have still gone through with it. She just, like, morally questions things. Which, I mean, makes sense. Like, what is he there for otherwise? To peer pressure? It's like...
I guess so. I think it would have been more interesting without him, because then you would have really seen what a flawed person she is instead of blaming this other entity. Yeah.
The only instance where he was interesting, and this had more to do with Bean and what was going on than with him, was the whole possession episode. And that was only because it was like, oh yeah, of course, because she's doing things that you wouldn't expect of a woman at the time, that she must be possessed, right? Because, like, a woman wouldn't naturally do these things, like naturally drink or cause a ruckus or disobey her father, etc., etc. And again, that's not even to do with him. He just happens to be there, happens to actually be possessing her, quote unquote. So, he's just not all that interesting.
And he's inconsistent. He's a demon. Why would he decide to save her when she's being exorcised, when they try to burn her? So what? So he likes her? That's a very human emotion for a demon. And then in return, she saves him. Why would you save a demon?
Because they're friends.
Oh my god. Oh my God, the inconsistency. I can't even. And then when she gets drunk and she's like, oh, I'm not drunk anymore. A second later, like at the fucking swamp when she's hanging upside down from the ceiling. That's not I don't want to see a teenager naked. It's a really uncomfortable thing. And they do it twice. And what? It's supposed to be funny? It's just gross enough. But the point is, she's drunk, and then a second later, she fucking escapes and runs like if nothing happens. And she does the same thing when she's like high or whatever. It's not a one-time thing. They're super inconsistent.
She just sobers up super fast, magically, all the time. Unless she goes on like a drinking binge with them, and then she wakes up in the plague pit. Like, that is the only instance.
And that's the other thing about Lucy. He just lifts all the bodies. He allows for these cheap plot turns. You know, instead of finding a MacGyver way to get out of the pit, or somebody noticing her and her having a deep realization, oh, well, Lucy, he's a demon, he's got superpowers, he could just scare these people away to help us. He can just lift all these corpses to enable us to leave the pit. You know, it's cheap. It's fucking cheap.
I don't know if they were trying to give him character development, now that you mentioned that from before. Because he is, like, all-powerful on the one hand, so he ends up being a bit of a Mary Sue-ish kind of character. Yeah. Not really, but, like, you get what I mean. He's just too powerful. And then on the other hand, he also, like, ends up liking them in a weird way. Like, he's sad when Elfo dies.
And he shows the king that his wife tried to poison him. Yeah. You know, that's the thing. If they would have made him more chaotic, more, like, chaotic neutral, I would have understood. If he just wanted to see shit go down for his own entertainment, I could see why he would decide to show the king, oh, look at this, or possibly help Bean a little to see her like wiggle out of the pit or something. That would make more sense to me than him starting off bad and going good, and Elfo starting off good and going bad for no reason other than their exposure to Bean. Yeah. And why was he sent on the wedding? It would have been way more interesting if she would have been, like, born with this demon, you know? Like, and we would have thought she was cursed or something. And the curse is actually because her mom is evil and it's part of, like, this bloodline or something. See, that would have been better. They should really just hire us as creative consultants.
Really? Oh, goodness. Again, like, everything it just misfired on everything.
Except for episode 9 and 10. Those were the two episodes that I actually did like.
There were just too many filler episodes.
Absolutely. I count pretty much 7 or 6 filler episodes.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
In a 10 episode series.
Literally, for some of them, in my notes, I just write nothing important. Nothing important except maybe she kisses Elfo, but honestly, who cares?
It doesn't do much except for, like, establish certain things, like, in a weird sort of way, like...
And it's boring. You can do that while having action happen.
Yeah. The party episode in town, there was just no point to be honest.
Absolutely. That's the one that I have literally written nothing important next to it. Those are my notes for it. And I think that they decided to stretch it out on purpose because you were mentioning to me earlier that they're counting season 2 as season 1.
Yeah.
So I feel like they wanted to stretch out season 1 over 2 seasons for some stupid reason. So they're like, oh shit, we need to put in some garbage in here to make the fucking show longer. What are we gonna do? Let's just throw in some random shit about her being drunk and doing some no good shenanigans with her 2 loser friends.
Yeah, getting high all the time.
Also, I don't know if we mentioned some of the sexist jokes, but that was a definite problem for me as well.
Yeah.
For example, there's a friend zone joke, and I fucking hate that term. It is so annoying. It ties into rape culture before, like we were talking about with this fucking good guy narrative. Like, enough with the friend zone. If a woman is not interested in you, she is not interested in you. She does not owe you anything. If you're not interested in being her friend, and you only want to be with her romantically, and she's not into you, then just give up. Move on.
Yeah, exactly.
Enough of this.
And the fact that Lucy kind of follows it up with, like, oh, you're never going to leave here? It was such a bottom of the barrel, like, let's just throw this to the, like, 14, 15-year-old guys who are, like, really into this kind of humor. Ugh. And it was just so boring. They really, it was just not necessary, and it just builds up that narrative even more. So like, nah.
And then some sort of like quasi homophobic jokes maybe, where she's at the party and the Vikings arrive and she's like, there's only one thing left to do, I'm gonna switch team. And he's like, no, it called it by the pants. And it's like, what? Okay, what is your intent with this joke? Really?
It's weird because they have some of the jokes were genuinely amusing. That group of bandits that was led by that woman, who sort of play with the gender non-conforming kind of things, like with the jewelry, which like had an actually genuinely funny moment. But then it doesn't feel like Lucy's comment is genuinely meant to be satirical. So it's like,
no. And I guess you could argue that he says that because he's a bad guy.
Maybe?
But there's not enough satirical clues for me to completely buy that. If you're going to do satire, you need to be really obvious about it.
Yeah. I like to think that the show was sort of aiming for that with the way that Zog and her dynamic like sort of function. And the show is meant to sort of take some fairy tale fantasy tropes and turn them on their head. But it just feels out of place. Like, okay, yeah, you have a fantasy story with a female main character, you have the princess at the center of the story, okay, you have her going on adventures, she's not the typical dainty princess either, but that plot line just feels like it's something from the early to mid-2000s. It doesn't feel contemporary anymore.
That's it.
And so if it was satirical, it would have been maybe arguably great back 15 years ago, when Dagmar died, so to speak. It was appropriate for that time period. It's not so appropriate for now, because it just falls flat for people who want something more sophisticated.
Yeah, I feel like the writers might be stuck in a time before Netflix.
Yeah, which makes sense if they're all coming from that.
Yeah, I mean, they have years and years of experience in television, but traditional TV animation.
Yeah.
Or like, you know, the new traditional, because Simpsons was very revolutionary at the time. I mean, like that kind of traditional.
Not the new BoJack era that we're currently in.
Yeah, exactly.
Or binging era that we're currently in. Yeah. Just shows on Netflix are better about that generally. They can still have comedy, but they're very good at like sort of stringing you on from episode to episode to really make sure you know, okay, I just saw this, so how is this moving forward? How is this connected? I can't say how, but they're just much better at doing it than these guys.
Agreed.
One of the things I wanted to talk about, because I was looking at certain reviews online sort of to make sense of everything, was how subversive is the show? Is it trying to be subversive? They were trying to put this female main character who was like not necessarily traditionally beautiful, like her mother. She had the traditional like Simpsons Futurama like buck teeth kind of thing going on. Yeah. She was meant to be this belching, drinking, kind of cantankerous princess who didn't want to get married and who like knew how to fight. And all of that is fun, but wasn't enough, I don't think, to really just qualify as subversive. She can't just exist, is the thing. And the fantasy genre, like, you can poke fun at so many things that are so stupid in it. Like this whole crusading mindset, this whole the man has to go save the woman, which Merkimer does in the first episode. You could have like played with that more. You could have just poked fun at so many traditional things that kind of exist in that world, and to some extent they do, but just not in ways that were very interesting.
All that being said, let's move on to the final grades. Are you ready for this?
Dun, 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 dun.
We will be giving the lowest grades we have
Ooh.
so far. Just if you didn't see that coming.
So my final grade is a C-, which in my estimation is basically just passing. Just barely passing. It doesn't at all hit the mark. It had some high moments, but they were too few, too far between. The pacing was too much of a mess. Bean had funny moments, but I didn't end up feeling for her a lot in the end. I had way too many issues with Elfo to really care about him. And as much as I like appreciated the world building, which is maybe what was the funnest thing for me, it was not enough to keep me invested. Honestly, if it had not been recommended to me, I would not have watched it. I don't want to watch the second season, but probably I'm going to have to now anyway, just because I need closure.
And we want to do a podcast about it.
And we want to do a podcast. And like, I like this idea of a descendant to villainy. I think that's a really interesting plotline. If you want to be subversive, go for that. If that's what they're going for, that's great. I'm not sure that's what they're going for, though. And who knows? There are sprinklings of that. Maybe I'm just looking for a plotline, so I'm creating one in my head. But if that's not what they're going to do, if it's just going to be this, like, coming of age, teenager needs to find herself, she's angry with her father, she's just following the tutelage of her mother, I don't care enough. I just don't. So C-, passing, hoping they're going to do better. That's kind of it for now.
Yeah, for me, it's going to have to go all the way down to a D. Bad writing, too many filler episodes, don't give a shit about any of the characters. They are not likable. Jokes aren't funny. Pacing issues. I can't fucking stand Elfo. Lucy also really irritates me, not to the same extent as Elfo. The one character, that's not true. The two characters that I liked only starting from episode 10 was King Zog and the Queen Dagmar. That is the only reason that this show is getting a pass for me. If it wasn't for them, if it wasn't for episode 10, I would have failed it. That is how bad I think this show is. Basically, any problem that you can imagine, it has it. Mm-hmm. Another one of the good things that I did appreciate, though, other than thank goodness, the development of the king's character and the introduction of the old queen, which I was not expecting, which was great, was a little bit of feminist jokes sprinkled here and there, but then they're completely erased by the awful sexist sentiments here and there. So yeah, a ton of writing issues. Really disappointing. But I'm letting it pass because I believe that there is still hope for it. If it continues as it was doing with episode 9 and 10, I think it could be salvageable. I think it could go up to at least to around a C+, a B-, I think, for me personally. Or who knows, it might surprise me. Maybe they'll get their shit together. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the first season is really rough. Yeah. So I'm not giving up on it yet. I'm actually excited to watch season 2 to see if they can get their shit together.
If they just have like plot all the way through.
Please, just actually, we need a plot, guys. This isn't like postmodern literature. Like, please.
We need an arc to follow for the characters, for the story. Just like, give us something. And they have to be consistent,
and they have to be either serious or funny or both, but make sure that it's actually funny. Mm-hmm. And you have to get rid of the sexist content, sexist garbage, weird homophobic comments. Get rid of all that garbage. Mm-hmm. Make it actually subversive, if that's what you're going for. Stop being fucking chicken and bouncing back and forth.
Exactly. I agree.
Tell us your thoughts in the comments.
So if you like this podcast, please like or subscribe. Ideally both. And hopefully you'll be hearing from us soon. Boom, 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 boom.